time at all to get us going. And it appears to done the same here. Okay, right, I'm live with Ayden Linden from the other day and Big Bad Mama, who was also in the sort of circles that we've been sort of I've been frequenting recently. Having a bit of a chat about politics like last time. And a bit about racism, given some of the recent events that have sort of been transpiring. So firstly, how are you both? Are we all well today?
Doing good, thanks, Owen.
Yeah, I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Nice, nice. It's a lovely day here in England. We've had a few miserable ones recently, but the sun is coming through my window now. Nice day in America.
By lovely day, you mean minimal rain as opposed to constant rain, of course, for the UK.
Well, thanks to climate change, Ayden, we're going to have more sunny times in May. I mean, it was 20 degrees in northern England a few weeks ago, so we've got a very hot summer coming. Unfortunately, I can't imagine it's going to be a rainy summer. That's for sure.
For sure.
Beautiful
for sure.
here.
No, it's unexpectedly gray here today. The weather's absolutely fantastic, but it's very otherwise English over here, decidedly so, as far as how the sky is looking. I'll tell you what, I went on vacation in England in 2019. I was only there for 2 weeks, but for about the first week and a half, I did not see a single day that was not entirely covered in cloud. I had to do a double take when I stepped out of my little apartment about a week and a half in, and it was actually a nice sunny day out. But I will say this, when you guys have your nice days, they come out full force. You guys don't mess around
indeed,
with your nice days.
The king's country, Ayden, the king's country.
Exactly. Exactly.
But no. We've got a few things to discuss today and such, but I thought I would let Big Bad Mama start because I had heard a bit about Ayden's sort of social politics last time. Big Bad Mama, what BBM? What would you actually want me to call you, by the way? What's
It doesn't matter, Mama, Big Bad Mama. It doesn't. BBM.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Where would you put yourself, Ben, roughly? Because Social Democrat, sort of, someone leading left and such, lots of views that would probably align with a left-wing perspective. Was what Ayden sort of said. Whereabouts would you put yourself?
Yeah, I would align myself as a social democrat. I would look to the model of the Scandinavian countries in terms of a social model, which I would like to see in the United States. But mostly on YouTube, I deal with Christo-fascism and creationism versus evolution arguments or discussions, and that's how I got to know Dustin, by the way, through that.
Through those circles. I take it he was on the Christo-fascist side.
Yeah, well, definitely a creationist, and he would always try to nitpick the evolution model, but he was very reluctant to ever defend his creation, his quote-unquote model. And so I had a lot of frustrations with him through the years.
Probably weren't the only one. But no, there's a lot of overlap with the sort of Christo-fascist elements and the political stuff, right? Because the sort of person that's arguing for you were saying off stream about Kent Hovind, right? Like the sort of person that's really dedicated to the pseudoscience and the rejection of academic knowledge on stuff is also the same person that's going to advocate against, feeding hungry people, right? And having a welfare state that functions and paying for things. Because it's the same sort of conservation of power, which I think drives a lot of these movements, right?
Yeah, I've heard it referred to as end times fascism, which if you compared it to, say, Germany in the 1930s, they wanted some sort of future end goal in mind. Yet these, what I would call Christo-fascists, are end times fascists, and a lot of them are actually looking forward to the end of the world, though I don't think they really know what that entails. But it's a different kind of fascism than what we've seen before. It's worse in many ways, I think.
It's very... it's always tricky, isn't it, sort of ranking the fascisms. Like, it's definitely got that, I think, because we're more technologically advanced and stuff now, and because we're further into the climate crisis, there's a definite fear to the end times, like prophesizing that a lot of these people do. The fact that we've got nuclear weapons, we've got the technology that can basically level an entire city in seconds, and we're also like right on the cusp of really
Ecological
serious
collapse.
Exactly, right, exactly. You know, the stakes feel a bit higher, but at the same time, you know, you imagine if you were in like 1920s, 1930s Germany when the Reich is really sort of building, and this is like before obviously Hitler sort of messed things up, right? Like the fascists inevitably blew themselves up because they always do. But you imagine actually being in the world at this time, and you've got this movement growing. Like it must have seemed just as scary to them as we feel worried about the future now, right? Because you've got this totalitarian, this movement sort of rising across Europe, Germany, Italy, even in the nations that didn't sort of have official fascist governments.
Spain.
You still had these massive like movements rising and such. But I think there's a really important sort of link, and I'm quite glad you brought it up actually, because there's, I suppose, why I would say that beyond, like pragmatically, I definitely agree with the idea that social democracy would be a good thing in America, because you're quite a right-wing country, right? Like you'd be much better off if you had a few more policies closer to European nations, especially in Scandinavia, right? But the important thing I think as well is that fascism in Europe, one of the main driving factors was that it was a reaction of the capitalist class to communism, or to what the Russians were trying to do was communism, right? Like the Russian people overthrew their czar and the autocracy and the unjust state and tried to make a better world. And obviously there's lots of things that didn't quite pan out and such there, but that crucial idea of overhauling the class structure and ending centuries of feudal lords oppressing the people was what people with power in Europe, in Germany certainly, feared. And so they turned to fascism, which is this, this right-wing movement that says, we'll actually destroy these movements. We'll replace the class consciousness with loyalty to the state, loyalty to the nation, and therefore through that you will... Exactly.
Well, there was also an intentional obfuscation of what fascistic ideas really were at that point, what the people will constantly point to on the right side of things. They'll say, look at the title of Hitler's party, National Socialist Democratic Workers' Party. And then you point out that, they also had democratic in the title, too. Do you think that they embodied ideals of democracy throughout their tenure over the country? I don't think so, but they did it intentionally to try and confuse people, to try and obfuscate what those ideas were, because early on in the history of fascistic movements in both Germany and Italy, they did co-opt a lot of socialistic organizations under the impression that, well, this is a new form of socialism. And then once they had power, the mask kind of came off, and then things like the Night of the Broken Glass happened. You started getting consolidations of power under more radicalistic kinds of forms. But it's important to remember that when people think of fascism, they think of a very, very particular form of fascism, mostly the kind that was implemented in Germany, and yet there was a fascistic government operating in Europe well after the Second World War ended in Spain that people often just completely forget about, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
in Italy before.
Correct.
Yeah.
And each one of them had slightly different interpretations. Like, for example, it wasn't until the German interpretation of fascism that a lot of racial components began to get added in. The idea of there being an Übermensch that is just inherently on a different level than these other groups of people was very much so a German quote-unquote innovation to the fascistic process. So it's important to remember that fascism can take on a few different forms depending on its context, and that there's a few broad themes that you can focus on, primarily themes about restoration of national honor, restoration of this national pride, the idea that this country used to be so much better at some point before, and the way that we get back to that being so much better is if you just give us all the power and all the scrutiny gets taken away from us. So it's a very... It's almost like communism in the way that it's not just this very strict implementation that you see in this one particular place. There's a variety of interpretations of it that need to be studied.
So
no,
I was...
go ahead,
sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, the anti-Semitism in Europe went back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's what I was going to... I was going to
even
touch
Martin
on
Luther
there.
made very anti-Semitic
awful
statements.
writings.
And I would point out that when the Nazis did take power, the first people they went after and sent to camps were communists. Those were among the first people that they persecuted, as you were saying, Owen. That was, and I think there was certain elements of anti-Semitism in the reaction against communism, because of such people as Karl Marx and who were Jewish, as I recall.
Yeah, no, exactly.
England's definitely. But yeah,
Definitely. I did, though, want to touch on, because I was agreeing with all the stuff you were saying then, Ayden, right? Up until, a few things sort of flagged up. So firstly, the idea that, because like you were just saying, BBM, right? The idea that it was masked off, once the Night of the Long Lives and stuff happened, I think is a little bit inaccurate, right? Because it's for one, as you've just said, anti-Semitism was nothing. It wasn't like it was a new idea Hitler introduced. It was very much staple across Christian nations, or certainly, obviously, like not the inherent form of Christianity, right? But Christian governments constantly used anti-Semitism as a tool for power. In England, for instance, we several times expelled all Jewish people from the country, like just as a policy. So the idea that sort of Hitler,
the pogrom.
Exactly. And then the other thing, patriarchy. The Nazis were not the first people to say yes, women should stay at home and be childbearers of a nation. Like that's an idea that's very old. Racial stuff, racial politics. They borrowed and adopted it.
It's not to say that they were the first ones to have those ideas. That's certainly not true. But the implementation of those ideas were done in a very insidious way that did hide a lot of the worst things that they were doing to those people, to the wider populace, which is why, after the war, as part of a process of denazification, people were shown footage of what was going on in places like Auschwitz or Dachau, or places like that, because the wider public was not informed that those sorts of things were happening. Unfortunately, that was something that was pushed to the margins of society. They were herded into these ghettos in places like Warsaw, where they were out of the public eye and intentionally kept cordoned off in these very small places that they could be more or less forgotten about.
See, that's true, but it also, in some ways, I think this is sort of the point I'm trying to make. Like, a lot of the stuff that fascism did was a continuation of the things that capitalist, imperialist empires and such had been doing for some time. I was about to say then the racial policies. The idea that Hitler and the Nazis were promoting, as you just said, right, Übermensch, like that was lifted and inspired a lot of it from American ideas of racial hierarchy. The idea that black people, non-white people and such were less than the full humans.
Like eugenics, or
exactly. Eugenics wasn't something that Hitler one day in Mein Kampf thought, yeah, let's put this into our country.
No,
so much of European academia had already engaged with these really backwards ideas that have long been debunked, right? But they adopted it as policy. So whilst I do absolutely agree that the Nazis were they're absolutely one of the most stark images of this, even the concentration camps, right? Like the atrocities of the Holocaust are found in many of the transatlantic slave trade, right? Like horrendous stuff. But these things are almost so normalized to the sort of certainly the capitalist form of economy and such, right?
Like the actuals,
exactly. Native Americans, in the chat, trans people, right? Like the Nazis burnt down and erased all the scientific research, or not all, but they destroyed the institute that had actually been built to house a lot of this research that was coming out, sort of saying, gender, sexuality, it's more complex than what cis heteronormative society had produced.
A lot of that progress had been made under the Weimar Republic. Prior to the lead up to Nazification of that country. And I would agree with you in saying that probably one of the first organizations that we see in history that really begin embodying fascistic ideas is actually the KKK. They have this idea, this obsession of restoration of national pride. They have this idea of racial purity. They have this idea of consolidation of capital for the favor of this one particular group of people, which is an aspect of the Klan that's kind of forgotten about. The idea that it was essentially a giant pyramid scheme that was made to funnel as much money as possible from people at the lower levels of the organization upward to people at the top end, mirrors a lot of the transfers of wealth that were occurring under fascistic governments toward corporatization. So, yeah, I mean, fascism as an organization definitely has its roots in America prior to being transferred over to a European context. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure Hitler on a couple of occasions directly cites the Klan as inspiring certain elements of his policy. So
definitely, there's so much similarity. I mean, Instant Soccer in the chat is basically saying my thoughts for me, right? Like, the US did many of these things. Nazi Party existed there. But what I did want to, on the sort of rewinding a little bit, you said that, and I think it also touches on what I'm going to bring up in a second. Communism had many interpretations, fascism had many interpretations, but the key difference, and I think this is what comes to the ideology of both, is that whilst fascism takes many forms, there are central tenets that can clearly link to Nazi Germany, Mussolini's Italy, the current trajectory of the US and such, that make it very clearly something which has that totalitarian power, the ultranationalism, the capitalist control, and that demand for further commodification, the racism, the bigotry and such, makes it that ideological thing. The communist movement in Russia then leading into the USSR, I think, is different in that, whilst absolutely you had anti-Semitism from Stalin, for instance, you had the suppression of peoples. One is as we sort of said a second ago, right? Like a state slapping a name onto itself and then doing things because it has that sort of, oh yes, we are nationalistically representing you through our atrocities and such. The other is fundamentally, Hitler wanted what Nazi Germany became. It wasn't as though it was like sort of co-opted by people and they
absolutely
got misguided, right? Like
yeah.
There's a clear. So I think when we see anti-Semitism from fascist countries or countries that are fascist, that's like part of the core goal of othering people and creating a hierarchy. Whereas when in Russia you see people who may well have had revolutionary ideas also perpetuating that anti-Semitism and such, that's different, I feel, because that is the societal, as you said, BBM, right? Like anti-Semitism has existed in Europe for centuries. There's so many documented cases across the continent of just really horrendous attitudes towards Jewish people, and so that exists as like it's in the conscience already, whereas the other is sort of intentionally put into state policy and such.
There's no tenet of communism that is indicative of racial hierarchy. There's no tenet of communism
fundamentally
that's indicative of anti. Yeah, exactly. I was actually just about to say the end goal of communism is the eventual unification of all of those people within those classes and the dissolution of class conflict entirely. So that kind of necessitates the dropping of those boundaries and barriers. There's a co-opting of those ideals that did not exist within fascism. I think fascism, quote-unquote, lives up to a lot of its original ideals a lot more than the interpretations of communism that you see within states like the United Soviet Socialist Republics, where you see this cult of personality known as Joseph Stalin essentially entirely hijack the movement and turn it into his own personal interpretation of it, that being Stalinism, which is fundamentally different than the interpretation of Marxism articulated by people like Marx. So, yeah, there's definitely a huge difference that is to be had between those two ideologies.
I mean, in the USSR, they became the corporation, basically. The state became the corporation. And
state capitalism, right?
They enriched themselves, which I think went against, the socialist ideal.
Definitely.
They were all about enriching themselves. And, it's really still like that with the oligarch system that they have.
And it largely
except they're not part of the government. I'm sorry.
It largely tainted the perception of communism in the Western world because it was that form of government that the Soviet Union tried to export onto other parts of the world as part of their global revolution. It was
people associate that form of communism with socialism and social democracy because they don't understand the distinctions between those?
Like, not just not understanding though, it's also, and I suppose it ties into what we're going to talk about later, it's also that sort of social process, right? Because we live in societies with hierarchies and hegemonies, people in charge of Western countries have a vested interest in maintaining the sort of Western liberal capitalism that we have here, right? So, of course, when, for obviously the Soviet Union wasn't like socialist or communist or anything, but it still represented a change. You still had a difference between how the two, the sort of Eastern Bloc and such and the West were formed, right? So the Red Scare consequently happens, right? In America, the elimination of essentially most schools of left-wing thought from institutions and government and such, to the point where now you get to the 21st century and the supposed left-wing party is at best neoliberal, centre-right at best.
I mean, there's
exactly right. I mean, the most left-wing guy in it, is
Bernie.
sort of the most. Yeah, exactly right. Like one of the more prominent left-wing candidates for president, Bernie Sanders, would barely even he would be in the probably conservative parties in a lot of countries in Europe because of how successful the Reds. Exactly, like the Reds, for as much. I mean, this isn't me also, by the way, saying, oh yes, the Democrats are 100% fascist or anything, but like at the same time, because you saw this drag to the right, this right wing co-option of culture almost. As you said yourself, like many of the things are morphed again into a situation in which the left wing perspective is deemed unthinkable. It's the same as the evils of communism, even as atrocity happens day after day in America.
Well, I mean, have you ever seen the image of the homeless man sleeping in front of the Victims of Communism Museum? Because I think that is such an adequate kind of representation of the idea that America thumbs its nose at these ideas, and meanwhile the vast majority of the people that thumb their nose at it, don't bother to actually engage with the ideas on any significant level. They don't bother to actually read up about communist theory before they start criticizing it left, right, and center. They just rely upon other people to interpret those things for them and regurgitate these ideas for them. But then there's also what you guys brought up earlier about the rise of McCarthyism and its shifting of the Overton window in the United States more and more toward the right. I mean, I'm a fair bit younger than I think either one of you. I'm 25.
Oh, you are just. I'm 27.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you have the gravitas. You have the gravitas of an older gentleman, McDonald. I will give you that.
That's very kind, Ayden.
Yes.
But anyways, even within my lifetime, that window of what is considered socialistic or communistic has shifted so much to the point where, just some of the most milquetoast, bare minimum, we should help our fellow man and not just only worry about the acquisition of our own wealth immediately gets relabeled as communistic thought and just shot down out of pocket, which is absolutely absurd, but is indicative. The shifting of the Overton window further and further to the right is indicative of a rise of more extremist right-wing ideologies, which is kind of what we've been seeing over the past decade and a half.
I mean,
I think... sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you say that the Red Scare led to the military-industrial complex that we now have in the United States, which, Ayden and I have discussed this. By doing the Red Scare and kind of propagating that, the government created a fear in which they could grow this Pentagon-based consortium of weapons manufacturers and that kind of thing, and basically give power to oligarchs in the long run, which is kind of what we're seeing now, a country run by oligarchs.
Yeah, no, I think definitely that you got to make that connection, right? Like the anti-communism that we see, the anti sort of left, is always a tool of capital and capitalists to maintain, grow their power, accumulate more capital, expand their reach, and ultimately preserve that hierarchy that sees themselves on top. Red Scare is a perfect way to do it because you're simultaneously dismantling any sort of ability to gain that class consciousness in the US, and then saying, oh, well, look at this big scary country, let's now stockpile thousands of missiles, send our bases, or put our bases in dozens of countries around the world, and then give ourselves a pretense to intervene in pretty much any conflict that happens in any continent around the globe, right? But I think I wanted to, sort of on that point, and also sort of what you were saying, Ayden, the idea that people aren't reading left-wing discourse and stuff, which is definitely true. I think there's a dimension to it which really ought to be touched upon as well, and it links into one of our themes today, racism and things like that. It's absolutely true that people across the board, even the ones who call themselves right-wing and Republican, support things like having affordable healthcare, right? Like, they want the ability to be able to go to the doctor and buy the medication they need, or have an appointment and such. No one, despite what people say, oh yes, socialism doesn't work, no one likes the idea of being bankrupt because you couldn't afford to actually even get to the hospital, let alone have the consultation and get the treatment you need. But
right.
This and education and free transport, all the things that are widely supported, not just in America, but just in most countries that had this creeping neoliberal privatization, they have false consciousness. They have these ideas planted in their head, and one of them is racism. The idea, certainly in America, but definitely in other countries as well, that people basically need to be stratified. Racism. The black man is going to come and sue your jobs and threaten our way of life, and inevitably that ties up with sexuality, that ties up with the order of a family, who's in which space in society. And so through this societal racism, through this planting of themes in various forms, people are distracted from the actual issues in society. The fact that a corporation has billions while some people sleep not in a home but on the streets, and turn to nebulous false things. The immigrants have destroyed our way of life.
That's what I was going to say. They're using that topic. They're using that topic of immigration as a way to instill racist policies. And when they're talking about immigrants, they're talking mostly about Hispanics. And, there is a massive wave of anti-Hispanic racism that's happening in the country as well that we haven't seen, I don't think, ever to this extent. I don't think people in America voted for ICE busting people at Home Depot or
ICE violating people's Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, or ICE just killing people on the street, right? So I think they've used this. I mean, ICE in some ways is their own brown shirt Gestapo
100%.
That they use to instill fear, and they throw these things over our head like, yeah, we're going to, we probably won't put these people at the election polls, but, we'll have to see what the situation is. And there's this whole fear campaign that they're trying to, and we can't kowtow to that.
Oh, it relies on fear inherently. The Save America Act, quote unquote, that's trying to be pushed through right now. The entire premise of it is exactly aligned with fascistic ideology, that you need to give up a portion of your freedom, because in exchange for just that tiny little iota of freedom, you'll get all of these benefits in exchange. The country will be saved if only you just give up this little bit of your freedom. I mean, it's classic fascistic playbook. But also with what you guys are talking about when it comes to race, one of the things that baffles me about racist thought with a lot of conservatives is that, don't get me wrong, have individual people always been prejudiced throughout human history? Yes. I'm sure there have been individualistic examples of racism all throughout human history, but the institutionalization of racial prejudice is something, when it comes to the prejudicial nature that people of color are being treated under, or the prejudicial nature of Jewish people even. A lot of the institutionalization of that only goes back to a few centuries in time. It's not something that you really see starting to crop up in a lot of places all the time until the early modern period. And it just I find it very odd that these people find themselves to be so conservative. We need to go back to this earlier idealistic time, and yet racism as an institutionalized thing is actually a fairly modern, I say innovation in the worst possible way in human history. And I only say innovation because it's something that you don't see implemented on a societal level until fairly recently in the human condition. For the majority of history, you were categorized based off of the actual town or city or village that you were lived in, and the religion that you followed were the two primary things that kind of categorized you in most societies. The idea that you are inherently different to somebody else because you are black, for instance, really does not show up in places like the Roman Empire. You don't really find people who are of African descent being treated differently in the Roman Empire any more than you would find people of Germanic or Syrian or even Greek descent being treated at that time. Because it's not something that is inherent to the human condition. It's not something that everybody has to immediately have put in their minds. It is something that was kind of, on a societal level, implanted into a lot of people's minds artificially.
Exactly. I mean, race is a social construct. It was invented. It's, insulin shocker, again, all racism is systemic because it stemmed, created, cultivated, as you said, a few centuries ago with the slave trade, with the expansion of empire, racial capitalism, very interesting, Cedric Robinson, great book, great read, great concept. The idea that the mass expansion of capital, the need to accumulate more, created the conditions in which race became a classifier for society, in which the mass exporting of people from Africa created this new demand for labour, which had to be sustained with more and more and such, and therefore you then divide to get around the idea of, hang on, we're treating people like garbage here, what's going on? You create the arguments that leads to racism. Oh, these people are inherently different from us, they are not the same, they're not human, right. Therefore, and you get the conflation of religion there as well, right? Oh yes, it's God made these people for us to enslave and do atrocious things to. God said races should be separate, and just a few other BS arguments and such, right?
Right, but like the plantation Bibles that were distributed that had massive parts of them edited out.
exactly,
Mormonism.
Right? Exactly, like we could be all day sort of talking about that element of it, right? I did want to because I think it sort of ties in very well into our sort of other point of this sort of conversation, right? Like the idea that a lot of people did not vote for ICE to smash up their towns and kidnap people and such is 100% true, BBM, and I do completely agree. But I also think that it's also true that most people didn't vote for this, right? Just not numerically. Not even a quarter of the country voted for this Trump administration, which I think is lost sometimes when we discuss and in the UK as well, right? Our electoral systems are not very good and don't accurately represent what people actually want and support in their own lives. But
almost
at the same time, well, exactly right. But at the same time, I think there is some value in identifying the long-standing cultural, interpersonal and conscious racism and subconscious that exists in American culture. Whilst a lot of people certainly, did, like you get all these articles now, right, of regretful Trump voters. Oh, I didn't think this was going to happen. Oh, I didn't think this, blah blah blah. But they were aware to some degree that there was an increase of violence and trouble that was going to come. They do. True. They are aware that there is something going on, and that's because they don't fundamentally see the violence that takes place in a capitalist state like America as being inflicted upon the parts they consider relevant to themselves, the non-white parts basically. So when they, as you were saying, BBM, they conceptualize the the sort of Hispanic, Mexican American immigrants who've come from the Caribbean and such to American cities and such as this wholly racialized, exactly right. Some lunatics, negatively created stereotype. So they're happy to imagine all the when they hear, oh, I separated this family, they have some justification. Oh, well, this is an illegal immigrant, right? But they were told, and they know that this isn't the case, but they have a racialized idea in their head, so they don't care. It's been normalized for them. Insulin Shocker again on fire in the chat. They don't care that trans people are going to end up being incarcerated and dehumanized and killed because they aren't part of the normative circles that they're used to, right? Like if we're incredibly lucky, they have some acceptance of not acceptance. They permit and tolerate the idea of a gay person because the LGBTQ movement has massively fought for that to be normalized and for that to be less immediately stigmatized, as it obviously it still is stigmatized, but like it's there's been a lot of progress across the board for LGBTQ people since previous years and such, right?
Well, look at what Trump did in this. Ayden mentioned the Save America Act, which I guess became the Save Act. They dropped the America for some reason, but look at the things they put about trans people in that. The whole thing is about preventing mail-in voting and these different things all about preventing people's access to voting. But then they stick these two things in there about no men in women's sports, which is not, it's really a non-issue. There's not that, it doesn't affect that many people. I mean, yes, trans people it does affect, but in terms of them sticking that in the Save America Act is really insidious. That's coming from the president basically, and there's also no mutilation of children. I think is also one of the things that's in there. Like that's happening on some sort of a huge scale. Kids are going to school and then they're doing surgeries on them during school and returning them to the parents without their knowledge. That's some of the propaganda that's going through the country. Ayden can back me up on that. There is that propaganda that kids are going to school and being given surgeries and basically gender surgery or treatment, and then they're coming home a different gender. And this is like at the highest echelons of government. It's really insidious at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
But do you see how this as well as it, because you're absolutely right, it is artificial insertion of a completely irrelevant and untrue thing into a bill that is, as you say, insidious, right? But it's also, firstly, a deliberate attack on the populations it deems to write out of existence, right? The incident soccer again, when the first one was here, right? Idaho passes this law, ID stuff.
Well, in Kentucky, they're literally being disenfranchised in Kentucky. Like they basically don't have the ability to vote unless they give up their current ID and they have one made that completely conflicts with their identity.
Exactly.
And they're literally being forced to commit a crime because if they go to a public building and they say, I am now changing my gender back to this other gender, even though they don't actually hold those changes, those differences to be true, that is perjury. They're forcing them to perjure themselves, essentially.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, though, right? Because at the same time, whilst it doesn't, proportionally, no men in women's sports, there's not many people it would affect. But at the same time, it absolutely affects everyone because it's a case of a fascist ideology saying this is how society is, this is how life is. Trans people, if they get affected by it, tough because we don't consider them human enough to care. And so once that is placed down, if that's not propaganda, but then also a direct attack on LGBTQ people and a precursor to then what is planned for other groups. The second you pass that law, you then are a step closer to doing the same for all, get gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. You, as we're seeing now, can disenfranchise black people once you've done the same thing to trans people and any other marginalised group. You can define sport a certain way and then exclude thousands of women from actually playing sport altogether, right? So,
and it's the first step of a very slippery slope,
Exactly.
If we accept those things, if the American people as a whole accept those things, then they're going to take it to as you just said, they're going to take it to the next level and the next level. And, that's what happened in Nazi Germany, I would say, that they kept taking it up a level and they kept taking it up a level. And the people were so fearful at a certain point. Plus they had their own biases going on that they were able to sell these, monstrous ideas. And I think, the first steps, people really have to fight against those first steps so that they don't get to those later steps.
And
If that makes
importantly,
sense.
yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And importantly, hi Robin in the chat, by the way. Hope your birthday stream went well, by the way. Just saying.
Hi, Robin.
When it was on the worst time, like for UK times, like I think I was asleep for the whole duration.
How
of it.
dare you,
So
Robin?
apologies, Robin. I'm sorry. But no, like I think it's what we can conclude from that, therefore, as well, is that there's no point in sort of having a definitive, we are now, this is the official sanctioned fascism line. Like, every step is part of the fascism, and just because one, not like Nazi Germany in 1940, say, was more fascist than Nazi Germany in 1933, right?
Right.
But they're both still fascism. They're both still
Right.
the same hateful movement towards it. And so when, a decade ago, the far right were trying to, get these talking points normalized, that should have also been considered fascism and not just sort of waited until today when Trump is, now certified fascist because he's, got all this stuff going on. And there's still many, liberals who won't even say that, who still can't, as we were sort of saying earlier, like they can't, because Nazi Germany is so envisioned, and because they have these ideas of the Holocaust so in mind, they can't identify anything as fascist, even when all the same stuff that happened in Nazi Germany is like happening right now, right?
Well,
like if you're
when those people are always like, oh, if this is such a fascistic country, where are the camps? First of all, I mean, you can point to the literal camps that they've been setting up over the last couple of years. Yeah, like, you can point to that, but also, even just granting them the premise that we're not there right now, wouldn't it kind of, by definition, be a little bit too late to do as much to be able to affect and prevent those sorts of horrible, insidious things from happening if we wait until the camps show up to be like, okay, now we're in fascism, guys? No,
Yeah.
you have to be proactive, but the problem is that America, as a country, is extremely reactive rather than proactive. They have to look at the circumstances that are around them and react to them rather than go, maybe we should take a few steps ahead of time to actually do something about this and nip it in the bud before it becomes a serious issue. That's why in 2008, America and China had nearly the exact same public transportation networks, and nowadays, if you look at China, it absolutely kicks America's ass because they're a much more proactive country that's much more
But
forward-facing.
even that, I think, is a little bit of an essentialism, right? Though, because it's not as though, like, because of proactiveness and reactiveness, like, these are cultivated things intentionally by a system that, like neoliberal capitalism, right? Like, they don't want to spend money on public services because that would take money away from capital. If you as a state say, right, we're going to fund a proper functioning transport network across both coasts, that takes money, and you raise that money as a country by saying, okay, well, maybe Amazon shouldn't pay $0 of tax this year, right? And that upsets people in capital. So
And you have
capitalism.
you have market examples when America did try to implement, like, for example, when California was nearly going to pass a bill that was going to begin rolling out high-speed rail in the early 2010s, Elon Musk, the fascist piece of shit that he is, decided that he was going to go, oh, we actually don't need any high-speed rail in California. We're going to have the Hyperloop, and the Hyperloop is going to replace all of that, and then it went nowhere whatsoever. And when you really look into the quote-unquote Hyperloop and the project that they had going, it was essentially a giant smokescreen to try and disavow the notion that that kind of public transport was necessary, because it's not just a matter of it costing money to the American taxpayer that disincentivizes a lot of people. That's almost one half of it. It's that it takes money away from these billionaire oligarchs when people stop buying their products to commute to work and start taking the train to commute to work every day. They're trying to do everything in their power to concentrate that wealth toward them, and they're actively harming the country and making it regress as a result, but they don't care because they're the ones that are benefiting from it.
No, exactly.
I think what a lot of people miss is that the religious groups, the very fundamentalist groups in America, as well as the political wing, Christo-fascists, they're being controlled by the oligarchs, and the oligarchs don't care if there's infighting in between those groups. In fact, they encourage those groups to infight amongst each other, whether they're different races or what have you, racism, transphobia, all these things. The oligarchs encourage that as long as the money is flowing to the oligarchs without any sort of question from those groups that they're trying to control. And, I think that people sometimes see the politicians as somehow being in control of the system, and, they're not. They were elected to do a job by people up above them who are controlling them, in my mind.
Yeah, like the levers of government and such are heavily influenced by capitalism and the markets and the existing power structures of capital that have a disproportionate influence on on the systems around them and such. Which I think when people say, "Oh yes, the government is controlled by people," it flags up that sort of conspiracy alarm in people's heads, because it's very easy to take that and then
It's
end up in
money.
all sorts of exactly right, like money, but it's both tacit and explicit, because it's not literally as though I was going to say it's not literally as though they're it's a black dark room and they say, right, we're going to end public transport today, but at the same time it is, because Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are billionaires in government right now, basically with a direct line to Trump to influence policy, right? So there is still that thing. I did want to we mentioned it a little while ago, right? Like and we've sort of been touching on it, that cultural element, that normalization of bigotry and such. And so it's been quite a pleasant conversation. We've agreed quite a little bit. I did want to touch on, and you brought him up a little bit, VBM. I mean, I didn't have to sort of exclusively focus on him, but
The
that
elephant
idea
in the room.
Yeah, yes, exactly, right. A certain Mr. Buck, and his sort of, I think, we can use him as a bit of a case study, right? Because
Yeah.
I did want to interrogate a little bit the sort of maybe friendship, that association that existed, because I think I spent a bit of time over the last few days sort of watching back. Sadly, I'm not in. I say sadly, I'm not in the US time zones, right? So I go to bed, I wake up, and there's just all this stuff on the internet that has taken place. And over the course of the day, in between my study and in between my athletics and stuff, I look up and watch it back and stuff. And I think it's very safe to say that now the two of you aren't friends, or sort of planning
I was
to
never
around with
Dustin's
Dustin.
friend, perhaps like Ayden was. I would have conversations with him because he had these extreme creationist views, and
Yeah,
I don't remember even talking about politics with him too much, but I wandered into that situation on Dustin's channel, not even having any background of what had happened between him and Raptor. And, I see what I see is people just going against Dustin, a guy I've known for a couple of years. Um, and, of course, he was in charge of the channel, being it was his channel, but, um, I feel bad for the guy still because of his belief system and how it's holding him down and how he's a homeless guy living in his car. I have compassion for the guy. But, the things he said are horrible. Once I heard about what he was saying um, to those, I don't know how many people there were, but yeah, it was horrible. And I repudiate that completely.
yeah,
Now, I don't know if, I want to completely cut ties with the guy, because I do I don't like to have somebody that's just unopposed having these viewpoints on their channel without any sort of pushback. And I've pushed back on the guy for years through the creationism topic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Big
yeah,
Bad Mama's kind of touching upon something that I also have in common. Now, I may have taken it a little bit further than Big Bad Mama, but I do try to be an alternative voice when it comes to Dustin's views, because I think the prevalence of online echo chambers where only one kind of viewpoint is bandied about all day long, and an audience is cultivated specifically around that echo chamber mentality, can be a dangerous thing. So I think having an alternative voice around that can push back against those ideas and can call them out as wrong.
See, you know, like
there is a utility to that.
But like, yeah, I would say that like all of us, I think, spend time online speaking to people that don't have the same views. I mean, I know we're sort of all varying degrees of left wing, right? So maybe it's not quite the same like in this specific conversation. But you know, like I think you can look through my channel and you'll see plenty of conversations with people that definitely are quite right wing. But there's a clear like difference, I think, between or not what like firstly echo chamber I think is a bit overused a little bit, because I think there's no like you know, keeping around like speaking to people and entertaining certain political views are different things, right? And I think there is a difference between like you know, having divergent and diverse viewpoints and like keeping around, you know, bad ideas. Like if you're trying to build a bridge and you're suggesting different materials and different structures, and then someone's like build out a spaghetti, like you wouldn't think, oh yeah, keep this guy around because we need to hear different opinions. You'd just say, right, see you later, dude. You're not coming back to me.
It's not just a matter of quote unquote needing to hear different opinions. It's a matter of, from the perspective of people, I think a lot of people hold on to a lot of prejudicial views out of ignorance, out of ignorance, and out of a lack of experience of alternative ideas and views. Now, Dustin is not one of them, and I will say, Raptor said something in my conversation with him on my channel that I didn't really necessarily internalize until after my conversation with Dustin, when I kind of went back and reviewed everything.
Yeah.
But he said something along the lines of, you can't convince somebody who built their ideas on you can't logic somebody out of illogical ideas, was essentially what was said to me.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably one of the biggest errors that I committed, was thinking that I would somehow be able to convince Dustin using logical means that his ideology is bunk and that it doesn't make sense.
No, exactly. I mean, Robin says in the chat, Dustin's example of the ignorance the Southern American ideology creates. And to be fair, Robin, I think it's American at large. I don't think it's specifically like in the South. There's perhaps more because of obviously the history and such. But at the same time, you know, there's plenty like the guys in Washington, right? And there's plenty of racists in the north of the country as well. I think, you know, there's 100%. Like, and there's also, like you were saying, BBM, like I think we can individually take bits of, like, the fact that someone is homeless, absolutely, you can have empathy for that. The fact that someone has a troubled life, absolutely have empathy for that. But those things don't mean that we have to, like, I think it's tricky to, for, you know, like, for as much as we think, okay, let's not be in an echo chamber or whatever, like, there's still a social code that needs to be like upheld and adhered to, right? And like the guy that's screaming slurs, and I've heard like even in the, I think, a conversation that he had with you, Ayden, and a few others. I don't know if you were there as well, BBM. I can't quite recall, but he's screaming abuse. This is because it's been pointed out to him that Trump has dozens of accusations and allegations, and people have come forward and said that he's, you know, basically a complete scumbag, right? Like a rapist, sexual assault, the paedophilia, and he was found guilty by a jury, right? He was found guilty, and he's being shown all this, and he is screaming. He's being utterly abusive, and you know, someone like this, which is just that is. Ultimately, he's been given, you know, he has been given, even prior to all of this, you know, these recent events, right? Given so many opportunities, even before he overtly said, you know, the N-words and such, right? Even before he's screaming slurs. On MHN, talking about how, you know, he's comparing race mixing to inbreeding or whatever. He's like making all these comments about Africa.
Ethiopia, they don't have ice cream in Ethiopia.
Yeah,
I mean,
just
all
BS,
sorts of
right?
stupid shit.
Just BS. Like, that should be, I think, all these things, you know, clue us in to the idea that, okay, this person, it's not just like a difference of opinion. This difference fundamentally alienates and eliminates tons of people from the conversation, even ignoring a race. Dargesh, who I consider quite a decent person, I like to speak to him. He's someone that's in these circles as well. He finds out that Dargesh is non-binary, and he's screaming and yelling the F slur, the anti-LGBTQ slur at him, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Instant shocker. Who was Michael Carley? Michael Carley, I don't think is Dustin. That's someone that a Dave fan, I believe. I think that's not. Questionable individual. That's not.
Do we relegate? Let me just get this out real quick, Ayden. Do we relegate Dustin to his own just little corner of the internet and just kind of, don't push back on him in any regard? Or do we also, have in mind the audience that's watching and how ideas that are refuted of somebody like Dustin are important for his audience to hear? It's not a matter of changing Dustin's mind about things, because I don't think that's going to happen. But it's a matter of the people that are watching Dustin that are maybe like him a little bit. I don't know who watches his channel, but do we have to think of them as well?
I think that's a really important point. I think if we were, say, like massively, like had millions of subscribers, say, like, or even like tens of thousands, then it's different, right? Because then you've got an audience that isn't necessarily as immediate as so I would never sort of say, oh, yes, I'm a big YouTuber, so people here sort of are within a conversation away of me talking to them, and the bigger ones in our circles, even more so. If it was like a case of, say, I'm trying to think who it would be, like, if, say, Steve Shives, I just want to pull out something. Steve Shives, great guy, I like Steve. If Steve kept inviting Dustin onto his show and was like trying to convince him as such, then you've got to think, okay, well, you're like platforming some.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah,
I was
exactly,
just thinking of Steve Shives and Dustin having a conversation. That's why I laughed when I
Well,
did.
Well, that's the other thing, right? Steve wouldn't entertain it because he, like many people, would say, okay, this guy has no interest in learning, only wants to screw and be abusive, cut him off. I think that there's a difference between, like, engaging with someone like that, like Dustin. Like, there's nothing. I don't think engaging, as you say, it's probably not going to change his mind. But there's a difference between, like, I don't know, dunking on someone or refuting someone's point or whatever, and what you two were doing prior, for quite a while, which is sort of having him, yeah, sure, as someone you disagreed with, but sort of almost treating it like a panelist in a news show. Like imagine it's like a news show, right? Like if you have people on there that you wouldn't agree with, like who offer different opinions and such, but you could, like Kent Hovind, for as awful as he is, I don't think he's ever screamed the N-word a dozen times at someone or screamed.
He's done some really bad things, though. I mean, he's done
okay, well then I'll take it back then.
Chinese eyes on camera.
Oh, okay, well then I wasn't aware of that. Then yeah, he can go in the bin as well. But,
May I say something really quick here?
Yeah, of course, go for it, Ayden.
So there was an element of this that I think is important to talk about near the end of Dustin's initial 5-hour racist palooza thing that got over 200 and something views on his channel, unfortunately, because I think that was one of the big things that caused him to keep up doing it as overtly as he was. He got this attention out of it, and he thought that he'd be able to replicate that, essentially. But Dargesh and Raptor, if you go to near the end of the stream, accuse Dustin of being performatively racist. They accuse him, they say, you wouldn't be doing this stuff in your average everyday life. You're doing this the way that you are right now online because you're trying to invoke a specific reaction out of us right now. And I think it's important to point out that while, even if that is the case, even if he was being performatively racist, it doesn't make what he said any less acceptable in any way, shape, or form. It's still abhorrent. It's still awful. But I thought from the perspective of him being performatively racist, that I might be able to somehow convince him to basically knock that shit off. I thought that there was room there, essentially, to be able to get him to change that aspect of himself. But when I went in there on the next stream, and I started asking him more detailed questions about things like great placement theory and stuff like that, and then he starts essentially admitting that he finds those ideas very interesting, it's at that point that I realized, no, it's not just this thing that he's doing to try and invoke a reaction. There's something deeper going on there.
It's
where
both,
he does
right?
genuinely hold those beliefs. Yeah, but it would be, not like I said before, not to say in the slightest that it would make it acceptable behavior if it was just him being performative, but it does slightly change the context, in my opinion. It does allow, in a way, in my opinion, and you can push back on this if you disagree, Owen, but I think if somebody is being performative like that, that is different than somebody deeply holding those beliefs at the core of their person. And I do think there's more room in somebody like that to be able to try and get them out of that way of thinking.
Sorry to jump ahead of you, BBM. I mean, only in the sense that, like, if we're, say, like a linguistics person, if we're trying to analyze like the function of language in a conversation, we might say, oh, this is coming from something different. But it's not like, it doesn't offer any, like, it's still rooted in the same thing, and it doesn't really offer any substantial difference. Like, if you performatively say something, because you want to get a rise out of someone, you're still acknowledging the racial dynamic. You're still interrogating this line of, okay, these people are of a different race, therefore I am happy to say these things. That's still racist. And he also, like, for as much as it's performative, it's also like not to a degree, because for as much as he 100% thinks, oh yes, I've got to uphold my standard of never backing down and I've got to say this stuff, he also does just believe it as well. Like, he is willing to say, as you said, great replacement stuff. He, on one of the streams after that, was saying about how he didn't like the idea, he wouldn't date someone that's black, right? I mean, I don't know if he's dating much anyway, but like, that sounds harsh of it. I don't care, right? But it's he's saying things like, oh yes, families should be of the same race, and it's like, this person, and even before, like, I don't think, this is what also annoys me a little bit, like, because you two were, and I'm sure you wouldn't, say this now as such, but you two were saying, like, well, we need to almost prove, we need to find the logic in this, we need to, like, almost hear him say this and work out the context. Like, what context would you need? Like, he's screaming it, and I think also, sorry to, you can come in a second, so I almost finished this bit, like, I also think the clues really should have been there a little bit prior to it, because, like, here's a guy who, as you said yourself, BBM, right? Like, he believes these outlandish, like, interpretation of religion, because I've known many religious people, right, and they aren't like making no one nervous, and they're not like Dustin. He's on the streams saying all these, like, racist ideas about Ethiopia, as you've said, right? He doesn't believe in LGBTQ people being existing. In fact, he won't go to a church that has a pride flag. Like, this person is just a complete bigot. And so when you've got in the stream with everyone's on it and such, and you've got, like, Raptor there, you've got Dargesh there, you've got Q there, Sable, Melfi Mary's another person who's there. Like, all these people saying very vehemently, like, this person is racist. They've said this, they've done this, here's all the stuff. And we're still, like, trying to almost find this, like a maths test, like, where we're trying to find the exact
silver lining in it or something.
I need to reply to that. I don't
go for it, Ayden.
I don't recall at any point me trying to say, oh, there's some sort of context that makes Dustin's behavior with all of this, as far as all that racist stuff. I never once tried to say that any of that was acceptable or allowable.
No, you didn't say that, but it did take like almost like the like it took a bit of time to get to that, and that's not.
No, hold on. I had pushed back on Dustin's racism even on the previous stream leading up before that. I pushed back against his racism. I didn't have a problem telling him that he was an idiot for thinking the things that he did about race. I didn't have a problem saying that those ideas were stupid and fucked up, and that he shouldn't fucking say that sort of thing. So I did push back against those things.
Can I put something in context real quick? So,
go for it.
Ayden and I, to a certain extent, our community that we deal with a lot of the time are creationists and evolutionists, quote-unquote evolutionists, science-based people. And it includes people that are creationists. And these ideas, whether they're, racist ideas, transphobia, to a certain extent, we're dealing with that stuff every day with these people because, for the most part, from my perspective, I'm dealing with trying to instill science into their superstition, because I think that ultimately the crux of a lot of this comes down to religion and religious beliefs. So we deal in our community. Both Ayden and I have friends who are young Earth creationists that we consider our friends. And so Dustin has to be seen in that perspective in terms of our community. Now, I never claim to be Dustin's friend, and I'm not. But that just gives you some context of who we're dealing with. Dustin is just one person amongst millions of young Earth creationists in this country, and dozens that we deal with all the time in our community.
Okay, I do get that, right? But you're the 100%. I get the idea of being in spaces where there's people who don't have really big differences in the ideas. Like, I think all of us probably have friends who aren't left wing. I know for a fact in my running group that I'm with, there's people who have quite different views to me. But none of them are like Dustin. None of them. The fundamental difference, I think, is that how many of your young Earth creationist friends have said the N-word, let alone scream it at
there are
various
some,
different black
but
people?
not to that extent. Certainly, that's the
There's some who use it as well.
He's the extreme example, and yeah, I won't go on Dustin's channel again. That was my first time on his channel, and that was the last time on his channel while he holds those ideas. And I'm not going to platform him on my channel. Not that I stream, but I wouldn't platform him on my channel.
That's good.
After those things that I heard, that the things he was saying to Blue, and I just wouldn't platform him. I don't. But I just wanted you to understand. I just wanted you to understand where he fit into the context of how Ayden and I dealt with him in the past.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I don't. I'm not saying that. This isn't sort of like time to put in the stocks, guys. Like, you've failed humanity. Like, the point is more to sort of illustrate how the subconscious elements of racism sort of almost make us view and try and treat as rational the irrational. And like with what Ayden was saying earlier, right? Like the idea that because he absolutely did on the 5-hour stream, on other streams, criticize Dustin quite strongly, but like that criticism, I think at some point needs to actually have I think the frustration that a lot of people had was that it wasn't matched with something more concrete, right? Because for as much as it's good that there was criticism, it's criticism in the same sense that it was like any other of the wrong things that Dustin, like when Dustin says, Trump's actually helping America, his tax policy is good, or I believe in Christianity because of Adam and Eve or whatever. Like, these are also like things which are highly contestable, but that racial element, the very visceral element of
it's very personal.
Yeah, no, not just personal, but like fundamentally dehumanizes and means
Right.
that in your spaces, like if Dustin's there, tons of people can't access it. Like the person that is, Instant Shocker was saying earlier, right? Like when he was screaming about trans people, right? Like, transphobia is transphobia. Something faulty transphobic is still transphobic, and if we connect it to the logical conclusion from that transphobia, if I can scroll all the way back up to where's it gone? All this stuff, right? Like Project 2025, making trans people unable to fundamentally exist in the same spaces. And, again, like, I'm not saying here that, Dustin personally will enact the Third Reich, right? But at the same time, when, especially in our current climate, like, it's not as though, I think the frustration comes because it's not as though, like, Dustin's some person that came onto a few of your streams and, we after this happened, it's gone. It's like it took quite a bit of time for this to be realised, and even in that sort of transition space, that transitive space between the 5-hour stream where Dustin said the stuff for the first time, And the stream the other day where, Ayden, you quite rightfully said, do one, Dustin, you're just a scumbag. Like, there's that sort of almost, like, treating it as though, it's still something which is, like,
So
a character flaw or something.
There's still hope.
may
There's
I
still
reply?
hope in him, basically.
Of course you can,
May-
Ayden.
may I reply?
Of
So-
course,
I'm
Ayden.
sorry.
Insulin Shock is saying something in the chat. Transphobia is transphobia, and being performative doesn't matter. Now, I agree in the sense that it's still transphobia, and it still needs to be called out as such. The reason why I pointed out the fact that was illustrated to him at the end of his stream is because while I think that racism is still awful, whether it's performative or not, it comes from a different place if it is performative as compared to not being performative. And in my opinion, if it is performative, it is being done out of a certain sense of social pressure. And I believe that if it is indeed coming from social pressure, not saying that it's hold on. If it's coming from that place, I think that it would be easier to get somebody out of that way of thinking as opposed to if they genuinely hold those beliefs at the core of their being. And that's what I was trying to do, essentially. I made the mistake of doing the thing that Raptor told me about on the stream beforehand. I tried to use logical means to get him out of an illogical form of belief. And I held the opinion that if I completely wrote Dustin off, that there would be no chance whatsoever of him ever coming out of those ideals, because at that point, if he is isolated from everybody that has alternative views, it is going to become much more difficult for him to get out of that way of thinking.
And I understand what you're saying there, and I'm glad that obviously you recognise now that you're trying to, like you said earlier, right, trying to logic him out of an illogical position wasn't gonna, fix things and such, right? But on the point that there's like a different, social pressure makes people performatively do racism. Obviously, firstly, as we've all sort of said, that's still racism. But
Right.
Secondly, social pressure also creates the inherent die-in-the-wall racism, right? Like if Dustin had not performative, like if he had not, it wasn't performative, right? If Dustin just opened the stream by calling people the N-word,
Right.
that
I wouldn't have gone
functionally
on there if I heard
does-
that, for sure.
Exactly, right? But there's also, like, imagine, let's use a slight analogy. Like, imagine you're at a restaurant and the first chef says, "I've put glass in this cake, eat it and, like, cut your mouth up." And the second guy wasn't going to do that, and then you said, "Oh, I hope you're not like that last guy," and then he just puts it in because you've said that. Like, the same thing is happening. You're still being given a cake with glass in it, and there's still then responsibility to say, okay, well, this isn't okay. You're not a good chef. It's time to leave this establishment. And I think with Dustin, what he illustrates a little bit as well is that, for as much as like there's that, I mean, again, I'm very glad that you reevaluated things a little bit, right? But there's that sort of prioritization, I think, which also should be interrogated too, right? Like the idea that we might lose Dustin, we might think about this person's not gonna ever leave their views, but the sort of constantly sort of handing that rope, even the slightest like chance for him and such. In the same time,
would you have him
leaving.
on, Owen?
So not again. No, Dustin's let him as we were sort of hinting at earlier. Right, he liked having the spotlight on him for those days.
Has he been on here before?
He I went on his channel because I hadn't actually ever spoken to him before. No, that's not true. We spoke for about 2 minutes on Making Hell Nervous, and Jeremiah kicked me off for slander and said that I was disingenuous.
Right.
Right. So
You called him. Called Dustin like a test case, though. Do you know what I mean?
Case?
Well, you like he's the what would
A
be
case
the word?
study.
A case study.
Yeah, because he like what we're doing now is we're sort of.
Would it be interesting for you to have him on as a case study, or would you just not even want to platform him? Period.
Well, he's
I don't think there's a right answer there, but
no, because I think I wouldn't platform him. I'm done, to be honest with him, because there's no I don't need to directly have someone screaming at me to know how racism works. Like we've seen, not only have we already done that, we can also sort of see it. We know there's an element of like, what is the point of putting ourselves through just a miserable time with a guy who never listens, who even when it's not racism, it's still like a billion other things, not listening, shouting over you, like putting his face right in the camera.
He does the opposite of whatever you want him to do. He does the opposite.
No, exactly.
He thinks he's being independent and strong by doing that, but it's just the opposite. He's a very weak man in a lot of ways. And, Dustin, as I pointed out, he doesn't have any critical thinking skills whatsoever. And it's led him to accept that the current biodiversity we see on the planet is a result of a 6,000-year-old Earth and Noah's flood, and that he believes in those things literally. And that Trump is basically, a hero. So he's got all these, belief systems that are just antithetical to rationality. And, I do feel bad for him. I can't help it. I do feel some compassion for him about it.
Well, I think I think because we are human beings, like we have empathy for any situation, right? Like we can always find, I think, with the critical mind, something to say, yeah, there's a sad thing here, but that's still beyond that sort of feeling sad. We should still be able to then say, okay, but there is a social consequence,
responsibility that we have to not platform those
but not even ideas. Just because because for me it's not just like the platforming is just like one thing, right? Like, I wouldn't from this point now say, yeah, come on Dustin, let's have a nice chat on my stream, right? But it's also like, because if for whatever reason we were in the same place again, like, we're still gonna say to him stuff. Like I can still, and same for you. Like talking is one thing, right? But it's the being able to exist in the conversation as like an equal member of the social space means that tacitly Dustin's racism isn't non-negotiable. Because like imagine if on that stream Dustin had said other stuff, right, about like if he had said, yes, I am, I endorse the ideas of some pedo or something, like it would be, you wouldn't want to be anywhere near him, right? Like there wouldn't be any. But so racism is a similar social harm, and the contention I think a lot of people had with the whole situation was that him saying and screaming these things wasn't enough to drop him basically. And I know Ayden, that obviously that situation has changed now, and secondly it wasn't as though you weren't criticizing it, but it's still like the manner of, like, even just considering him a friend, right? Like it's a friendship that fundamentally meant that a lot of people couldn't be in the same space and enjoy equally, because who knows what Dustin's gonna say and do if you're in the same space together. Like it shows that for as much as and again this is we're extrapolating this to like all the situations where this would be the case, right? Not just like yourself personally, Ayden, but like all of it. Like a friendship with someone that's willing to use not just racially abusive language, but homophobic, sexist, just abuse in general, and manipulation, is one that doesn't let others sort of exist in the same space. And I think we see that with the other sort of element of this, the Making Hell Nervous crew, because I actually today I saw that again, being at the midnight hour or whatever, I woke up and I was on the internet and stuff and doing my research and getting my stuff typed up, and on my distraction I went onto YouTube and saw that Making Hell Nervous had a stream, and I watched it for a little bit because a lot of people that I like go on there, and it can be quite funny hearing them talk to weird right-wing Christians and such. And Jeremiah he's been told by the chat, oh, Dustin, are you aware Dustin said and done like basically complete KKK actions over the last like week or so? And Jeremiah's like, he's saying, oh well, you call anyone racist, and so they say to him, he said the N-word, he said, he openly screamed at people. And Jeremiah,
he shares some of those feelings himself.
Oh, 100%, because he was saying like, oh well.
Hey, Owen, I have to take off. I'm so sorry. I'm having such a good time, but I have to take off, and I hope I can come back on your show at some point, because I really enjoyed our discussion.
Yeah, cool.
And
anytime.
Of course, Ayden is my friend. I love him. So take care. I got to get going. Bye.
You enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
So yeah, Ayden, like what I was sort of saying. Did you want to say something, Way? And I wasn't. I don't.
No, 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 no. Please go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to interrupt you mid thought.
Yeah, so it was just about making out nervous. Like the person, Jeremiah. I mean, he was coming out with this nonsense about like, oh, I wrote it down actually, something because it was just ludicrous. Like the idea that black people being able to say the N word, but white people not, was the real racism. Just like completely divorced from reality. But what was more telling to me, what mattered more a little bit in that situation than just the sort of usual bog standard stuff that these sort of racist types say, was the tacit like protection of his own like standing in the situation. Where did I write it down? Like, he's like he understands on some level that Dustin's done something wrong. He says at one point like, "Oh well, I'm gonna have a word with Dustin," but if he sustained like if you accept the premise Dustin is racist and a scumbag, and then he's like your friend Dustin, Dustin is Jeremiah's friend. What does that then say about Jeremiah that this isn't a deal breaker? And obviously for Jeremiah it's not like anyway, right? Because he is racist too. But it tacitly shows that there's this I think this willingness, this awareness that racism is something bad, but this sort of placement of racism at a polarity. The people who are racist have to be sort of 100% proven racist, like the KKK, and then it's like socially acceptable. And then it's time to condemn. Sorry. And so when it's not the KKK, there's still some caveat or there's some qualifier that lets it be sustained and continued. And I think that is something to sort of really take forward. The idea that if, as we were sort of saying earlier, if we don't, like in the same way we wouldn't tolerate fascism before it gets too strong, if we're willing to not just sort of call out individual actions, but say to a person, okay, this is a deal breaker. Like you can't be in the same spaces as me if this is going to be how it is. Like that is one of the things that can unpack a lot of the racism that exists in normative spaces in, again, not just America, but in the UK as well. Because I'm a black person in the UK. Like I'm not. It's not as though the UK is some happy paradise. Like I've had plenty of things said to me, and I think it's important to, have that stronger sense of justice. Anyway, go ahead. What are you going to say, sorry?
So the moment that I've got a bit of an echo again.
Oh no, maybe BBM.
Dang it, BBM.
Left our chat.
These leftist agitators, they're trying to destroy the stream. You see what's happening right now, folks.
Anyways, the moment that I really kind of wrote off Dustin was when I realized that there was no possibility whatsoever that he was going to change his views and change his mind on these things. I have known people throughout my life who have been pretty deep into racist and bigoted ideology that have managed to get themselves out of that way of thinking, and that was what I was trying to do with Dustin. Now, the thing, like I had said before, the thing that I focused on a lot when I was dealing with Dustin was class consciousness and trying to make him aware of the situation that he was in, and that kind of linked in a way to his bigotry, because I was trying to point out to him that trying to blame these other groups of people is not indicative of reality to why you are in the situation you are in right now, living in your car. But I really wasn't aware, and that's through my own fault, that's through a failing of my own ability to really be able to discern that aspect of his character, but I wasn't really aware that he was somebody that deeply held these views on a fundamental level until I confronted him on it at the end of that stream. And like I said, that's a failing on my end, but that is just a truthful rendition of what happened.
Yeah, well, thank you for your honesty. I mean, like, again, I don't want to sort of turn this into like, oh yes, you're a failed Ayden, you've blown it. But like, I suppose there's no, I guess a mantra to sort of, or a theme might be, there's no class consciousness throughout intersectionality, right? Like the importance of considering as well as the class oppression, there's also racial oppression. There's also gender, sexuality, ableism, all these other things, right? Like for as much as like we were sort of saying earlier, right? Like there's lots of people in America who want their lives to be like even Dustin, right? Like if you cut through all of the BS, he probably would admit that yes, maybe the government should improve things to the extent that I don't have to live in my car and can live in somewhere that has an actual roof and walls and a bed and whatever, right? But he can't because, firstly, he is so far into cult thinking. Trump, he can't. Trump's like sacred to him, like practically God at this point to him, right? But as well as that, he's too enveloped in the racial stories he's been told to ever hear it, right? Like BBM was saying about ICE, right? Like he believes there's an invasion, and so this takes precedent over literally his own life. And a part of it's the sort of defiant oppositional nature he has, and part of it's his, as you say, that performative wanting to go at like, oh, the left has said this, so I've got to swear and scream at them and show they're wrong, even when it's stuff that they're like agreeing with me and such. But I suppose that class. I guess the importance of intersectionality is really important here because someone that, for as much as like I get completely that you're trying to sort of, or you were trying to take him out of that path, like someone that's unwilling to engage in, or not even unwilling, someone that has, as well as the class stuff, like all these other things, that isn't, especially when it's as overt as that, when it's not sort of, like a bit of a, okay, right. Like I think Q said it quite well actually on the stream. This is said, you take him aside and you say, okay, this is not okay. It's not just like, oh yeah, disagreement. Like you can't do this, otherwise we're done, right? Because I think for as much as like, because there's a lot of misinformation in the world, right? Like a lot of people believe in stuff not because they sincerely believe it, but because they only listen to like Twitter posts from Elon Musk or Fox News or something. I think there's no like deniability about using the N word. Like it's not like with ableism. Like there's lots of words that when you think about them, they're quite ableist and they have that sort of connection to outdated ideas about intelligence and the body and stuff. I mean, the arsehole is quite obvious, but there's also sort of more subtle ones like words like stupid and dumb, for instance. Like whilst they're sort of normalised and you probably wouldn't bat an eyelid a lot of times when they're said, when you think about it, when we use them, they still carry that same idea of intelligence and the order for society and such, right? But the N word's pretty unequivocal, right? Like, there's no one, I don't think, above the age of like 2 who understands who doesn't understand that word is overtly racist and overtly. Of course. Exactly. So then when Dustin, I think, uses it, like it's not the case that he's just he's not been educated or he's had a different upbringing. Like he fundamentally is racist, so there's a responsibility then I think. But I'm glad that. Sorry, you go ahead. Sorry, you try to say something.
No, you're good. You're good. So I do want to reply to that, but I just want to one more time attempt to explain what I said earlier because it seems like Insulin may not be quite understanding what I'm trying to get at. I understand, and I already articulated multiple times, that whether somebody is doing it out of some performative nature, it is still prejudice, and it is still wrong, and it still needs to be called out. All of that is true. However, while I agree with their statement that all bigotry relies on some level of social pressure, there are different degrees of social pressure being applied to somebody who genuinely believes those ideas versus them only doing it because they're putting up a front of some sort. I believe that somebody who genuinely believes those ideas have had them so thoroughly inculcated that they need minimal external social pressure in order to articulate those beliefs, whereas if somebody is being performative, they have an increased amount of social pressure in order to articulate those things. And the difference that lies within the motivation there, in my personal viewpoint, allows for the person who is being performative, due to the fact that they are more susceptible to that social pressure, to be pressured in the other direction. And the means that I was trying to apply that pressure, while not the most effective, I agree with you, in hindsight, it's always easier to look at things in hindsight, it would be more effective to just essentially tell Dustin, look, either you're going to stop this shit altogether, or I am not going to associate with you in any way, shape, or form. I agree that that is more effective. However, at the time, I was trying to approach it from a different angle, whereby if I still remained in his social circles and continuously applied that pressure to him, I believed at that point that that would be a more effective strategy, and that was shown to be false. And I admit that that was false, and that wasn't the proper way of going about that. But I want to make it clear that at no point was I doing that because I was at all accepting of his ideas or his way of thinking. That was not it at all. I was trying to get him out of that way of thinking.
Of course, no, I know that. I don't think anyone who's been critical of you, has for any second sort of thought, yes, Ayden somewhat agrees with these ideas. The point is more that, like when I think especially to Dustin as well, when we're sort of in Dustin's space, sort of coming up with these like social pressure, like things. Firstly, from Dustin's perspective, they come across as defenses, right? Like they, they're in Dustin's mind repackaged as, yes, Ayden is not, Ayden is giving me an out here, and I think it allows, as you probably acknowledged and such, like like a form of manipulation. Like it's a tool for Dustin to continually maintain his presence, because for as long as there is not the consideration that even the slightest degree that it's...
Oh, I was a useful idiot for Dustin. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge my role in that.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? And then when we extrapolate that to a wider sense, which is sort of, I think, the point of Dustin from this point, right? Like we're not, no one's like, oh yes, Dustin's the most important figure in American politics. Like,
no, but like you said, he's a case study, and it's an important, it's a good way of examining this way of thinking.
No, exactly. And so when other people, especially in sort of political discourse for things beyond just racism, when people are sort of speculating on like, oh well, how can we change this person? How can we do this with this person? What's the root of this person's racism? Like it, I think just pragmatic, like functionally, keeps said person in those spaces, and through that means that there's an oppositional and in places dangerous existence for everyone else who is marginalized by the bigotry of said person. And Dustin is a person with, shall we say, a life that probably isn't like amounting to much, unfortunately. Like he's got no friends. His only friends are making hell nervous. Like that should probably say enough by itself, right? But there's people who maybe are in possession of more social capital and cultural capital than Dustin, that maybe are just as racist, but don't scream it on a live stream in their car, and maybe say it behind closed doors. Maybe they use right. And we know this, right? Because I know this happens with other things, right? Obviously, I'm black, right? So like I'm not. Yeah, I missed shocking, right? The truth's been revealed. I'm not going to be in a social setting where people just openly use like the N-word and stuff. Certainly not one that's like a behind closed doors thing, right? Like if it's said to me, it's like yelled from a car, say, or and that was only once. But like I've been very fortunate that it's not been like I've not had the worst end of racism stuff. But like there's still okay, on another stream I'd happily talk about all the stuff that's happened in my life, right? But behind closed doors, we know that a lot of people who purportedly are not bigots say things which are bigoted, and in those spaces, there's there's people who maybe aren't like of the same level of bigotry, who don't share the same views, but still treat it as, oh, there's old Jimmy again saying, using those words, and not, wow, Jimmy, that's not okay. I don't think I'm going to be around you anymore if you're going to act like this. And again, 100% take on board that there's this sort of, you were previously trying to sort of you had a friendship, there was a connection that existed prior to independent of just YouTube streams. You want to challenge him but keep it around and such. And
I try not to just write people off. And
no, exactly, and I think that's an important quality to have, right?
But I just need to I need everybody in the chat to think about it this way, right? How sincere would you genuinely take it if the second that you guys said, "Hey guys, you should probably stop having Dustin as a friend," if the second that you said that to me, if I was just like, "Yeah, you know what? You guys are right. I'm just gonna dump him as a friend completely. He's gone." Would you really view that as sincere? Would that be really sincere of me to
that
do?
argument, I think that's the other thing. That argument might hold up if it was like, if the issue was like, oh, Dustin's just taken like £1,000 from you. He's just like lifted your wallet or something, or lifted your credit card. Or if it was like, oh, hey, Dustin, I saw him urinating on your grave, like on your parent, like your relative's grave. Like that would be the sort of thing where you would want to maybe think, okay, well, this guy's been my friend, so I'm not just going to believe this rumor. I want to actually maybe find out a bit more. Go behind the scenes and check things out.
Which is why I asked him those things about things like Great Replacement Theory and stuff like that. Because I wanted to see. Well, hold on. I wanted to see when I confronted him with those things directly, whether he was going to essentially prove all the claims that you guys are making against him right or wrong, because he can say all day long, I'm not racist, I'm not racist, I'm not racist, but it's until he actually and I understand that he did it before, and it was wrong of me not to have seen it for what it was prior to that point, but until he demonstrated to me thoroughly that that was the case, and that this was not just something that he was doing performatively, and that this was something that he, for one, was something that he held very deeply, and for another thing was just not going to have any chance of letting go. At that point, yes, I am going to write him off, because I do not have any chance whatsoever of making him see things in a different light and trying to change his mind or change his ideals.
But like, I get that, but like in the nicest possible way. Like, I mean, firstly, and not trying to insult you, but like, how thorough could it have been?
Go ahead.
Like, how thorough could it have been if the guy's like screaming the N-word, and it takes something else after that to like work out if it's not and even the performative stuff, right? Like, for as much as like, even if we accept the premise that, oh yes, well, he only said it, he only said it because he was goaded into it, which is,
well, no, it was complete BS. He was never goaded into it. But
even if he was, even if he was goaded, like that's still, like, for one, just someone who would say something just because he would, like, to some extent, like there's a point where you say, okay, take responsibility. Like it's not as far as
it's not just the presence of racist thinking. It's the fact that I realized that there was no chance that he was going to get out of that way of thinking. It was the fact that I realized that there was no possibility that he was going to change his mind. He was going to look at this from an unreasonable, irrational, idiotic perspective, no matter what was said to him. That was the defining factor that made me realize that this was a pointless endeavor, and that he is, indeed, just an overt piece of shit with no chance of redemption.
Yeah.
I believe everybody does, and you even said it yourself. He was given a bunch of chances from a bunch of other people to try and walk his stuff back, to try and walk what he said back, and to try and, I don't think repent is the right way of saying it, but be apologetic for what he had done. And I wanted to see that opportunity for him exhausted before I just wrote him off entirely, and I hope that you can, at least on a certain level, understand that.
No, I do get that. Like, I do get that. But like, even the idea that, like, when you realise, oh yes, well, he's always going to be like this, and he's not gonna, like, I think even that is a little bit like flawed in a way, because whilst I absolutely, I don't disagree with that part, right? But let's say there was still, like, in some hypothetical, there was still a chance for there's still a chance, not Ayden, a chance for Dustin to like change his ways and whatever, right? Like, there would still, I think, need to be a change in approach, right? Like, of almost like taking the there still should be like a adaptation to the friendship at that point where you say, okay, it's not like I can't have you on my live streams and treat you as any other panelist or whatever, and have you as this person if you like this, because I think it still fundamentally treats like, even if it's not like,
it grants a level of legitimacy to it that I did not did not intend to do. And like I said, it wasn't until after the fact, and I had conversations with people like Raptor and whatnot, that I was kind of made aware of that legitimization. It wasn't something I was overtly trying to do. I wasn't trying to give Dustin any kind of excuse for his behavior, but just because I wasn't intending to do that does not mean that that was not in a way what was occurring. I understand that now, and I recognize that it was not the right approach to take. I should have taken an approach that was more either you knock this shit off or I am not going to be your friend anymore. And I mean, it was demonstrated through the fact that it was pointed out to Darkesh said earlier in the side chat, Ayden, Dustin's crying in his post that you were never his friend. It's so funny how he's rewriting it. Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, it was demonstrated in the fact that his tone completely changed when that was what I did to him. When I did confront him with that, and when I did put our friendship on the line, and I did say, Dustin, you are going to lose a friend if you are going to keep doing this shit, his tone completely changed after that. So it was a demonstration to me at that point that you guys were correct in that. You were correct in that assessment. I was wrong in my approach to how I was trying to do it. I recognize that my approach could have been changed to be more effective, and had I known what I know now, right now, about how that is a more effective tactic, then I would have done it, because ultimately, I am trying to change hearts and minds when I am going about doing these things. Like on my streams, I know that your audience isn't very familiar with my content, but if you go onto my channel and you look at my streams and you look at what I talk about all sorts of things, and prejudice being one of them that I try to go against on my channel quite thoroughly. I have a pretty established history of being against prejudicial thinking. I just need to refine how I go against it and combat that prejudicial thinking.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like I say, I've seen some of your stuff before. Like another recent, trash collecting stream, rubbish collecting stream, very impressive. Making it all a bit better each day. But I suppose to wrap around, and because the sky is starting to get a bit darker, dusk is, you might have noticed, but my background's getting a bit of a different change. There's, I think, the importance of connecting anti-racism to anti-capitalism, anti-sexism, anti-LGBTQ, sorry, anti-homophobia, fair way of putting it, like anti-transphobia, all the marginalizations being opposed and such, right? Like, I think that when we're thinking about someone like Dustin, we're not just saying, oh yes, this is a racist person. This is a racist person in connection with all the other axes of oppression and discrimination, and that I think almost being willing to reject the sort of liberal, like, oh yes, well, this person can just be like, corrected out of their views, and once we say just the right argument, well, the individual treatment of it, and looking at it in a systemic way. Someone said earlier that it was Insulin, even so. You said earlier that I can't be able to scroll up and find it, but she said they said earlier that it was a systemic. It was a systemic. Sorry, I'm trying to find.
You're good. I will say it's kind of.
Yeah, so she said earlier that racism is a systemic function of society, right? Like, it's not as though it's just like individually bad people who inherently have wrong ideas that can be corrected. It's like it's a system which cultivates a mindset in which people believe that this socially constructed category gives them advantages over others, in line with the other forms of violence that capitalism is predicated on. And so if you really want a fantastic way to unite all our our opposition to discrimination, we should tie it into our systemic rejection of the current systems around us, and be it pragmatically, be it overarchingly, be it on a small or the large scale. If we push left firmly, we can really make strides in combating and opposing racism and all the other horrors that our social system has dragged up.
Right. I know that you're wrapping up your show here, so we can just close off at this point if you would like, but I did have one question for you, if that's right.
Go ahead. No, there's still time for a question or two. Cool. And same to the chat, actually. If you're watching and you've got a dying thing to ask or say, then please put it in the chat and we'll...
So, I kind of have a prompting question, and that leads into a more overarching kind of question, and that is, like, do you believe that racism inherently relies on ignorant thinking?
Racism relies on... So do I believe that it inherently relies on ignorant thinking? No, not at all. I think
You don't believe that ignorance is a necessary component for racist ideas?
No, I don't think so. I think that it definitely helps. I think that for people who are just in society, perhaps the immediate difference and the lack of knowledge about something definitely makes it easier to facilitate racist ideas. Certainly, the stereotype of the sort of snooty white person seeing a black person in their neighborhood and being like, oh gosh, crime, the danger, and crossing the other side of the road or whatever. Definitely ignorance is part of it. But just as equally, and perhaps more importantly, are the systemic factors. The person that has learned black people are, aligned with this horrible stereotype, have learnt it because political voices have realised that this marginalisation facilitates positions of power for them. They both can profit off the labour of a group that are disadvantaged by society and can keep working people from criticising capitalism and class and focusing on invented issues like race and nationality and such.
So,
go ahead.
Sorry, you weren't finished. Please finish.
I was going to be like, you look at the level of design that's put into the racist atrocities of the past, and it's not just ignorance. The people who chose to tear out parts of the Bible didn't do so because they just had to. They did so because they knew that if people read the parts of the Bible that said all are equal unto God, they would think, oh well, hang on a second, maybe we shouldn't be slaves, maybe we shouldn't be enslaving a good portion of other human beings. So absolutely, ignorance is a part of it for a lot of people, but when we unpack that, we can see that there's an intentional creation and cultivation of racist ideas that's perpetuated by right-wing forces to maintain power structures across society.
So a secondary question, would you believe that a distortion of reality is necessary for racist thought to take hold?
Again, I think that it's definitely very useful. I mean, having like an entire social media platform just spew out. Like I remember once.
Well, may I follow that up a little bit?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because this is why I'm asking you about this, is because I could very well not be right in my way of thinking here, but from what I've observed, every form of racism that I have ever seen relies upon some level or another of a distortion of reality. It's not that these black people are horrible just because they're black. They're horrible because they do all of these horrible things, and they have these horrible tendencies and these behaviors that, when you look into them, don't have any basis in reality at all. They're based off of things like stereotypes or things like that. There's a distortion that is taking place there in order to foment a hatred that would not otherwise exist. Would that be incorrect?
I think that that's definitely, like, what you've just said there is true. Like, there's definitely things that follow, but I don't think it's you don't need to inherently believe in this distortion for it to happen, right? Because for as much as it definitely helps, like if you've got like a treasure trove of just like racist BS to shove at people, right? Like if you've got it's like is it Breitbart that had the like black crime section on their website, like just ready to go propaganda to send someone if they ever sort of start wavering in their belief in racism. But at the same time, you don't I don't think the first people that started writing racial codes in the Caribbean, when they had significant plantations there and such, like they didn't necessarily need to believe in the inherent difference of races. They just needed to have a subjugated population to best farm tobacco and cotton and all the other stuff that they made their empires rich with.
It's a post hoc explanation for exploitation.
Yeah, like it definitely exists. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, it's definitely you only have to go onto like Facebook. I mean, I've not used it in years, but like you only have to look on some of stuff there to see like people complaining because like Haribo are halal, and it's like, yeah, of course it is, because it just means it's not against what a Muslim is permitted to eat as per their religion. Like, it's not so things like that, definitely, reality needs to be bent for a lot of people to believe it, but it's not inherent. It's a thing that facilitates making the realization of this expression of power able to happen. Because just as easily, like you could, like with ICE, right? Like I don't think the majority of Americans genuinely believe in when JD Vance was telling us about like Haitian migrants doing all these like odd cultural stereotypes and stuff, right? Like the eating random pets and stuff. Most people knew that was BS, and they've still like enforced ICE and stuff now. Like they've still got the societal political power to be able to send the troops into various regions and abduct people. So for as much as it's a tool, I don't think it's the tool. It's not something that you fundamentally need. That would be a system like capitalism to
No, I see
like a power structure, I would say.
I see your point. Do you believe that it is inherently dangerous to engage with racist ideas, or do you believe that, and if this is a false dichotomy, just let me know, but do you believe that it's inherently dangerous to engage with racist thought, or do you think that there is an element of utility in understanding why they think what they do in order to better combat those ideas or ways of thinking?
Well, I think that should be. I think that we can unpack that. I think it's absolutely important to recognize, firstly, that thought is racist, and so rather than treating it like a scientific theory, like a sort of a matter of like astronomy or biology or something where you would test it like an actual like science lab, like where you're treating it like a hypothesis, you are recognizing from the start that it is racist, and yeah, that's one thing. But I do think it is worth looking at it. Like, where does like if someone claims, people of different races are genetically different, like in an environment which is suitable, i.e., not like the newspaper or a TV debate, but like an actual like scientists can definitely take the time to demonstrate why the idea is wrong, and therefore connect that to social science and say, yes, this has been racially produced, this is something which has not followed a scientific method, but has been produced after the idea of race been socially implanted in someone's mind. That's definitely useful. I think that is different to like on TV sometimes where people will make horrible claims and you have to try and defend it and such. I think that's dangerous because that to an audience legitimizes the idea. Like in my country, for instance, we've had for decades people screaming about immigrants and screaming about Muslims and all these other sort of racial stereotypes and racializations, and that has led to a lot of political shifting, like you were saying earlier, to the right. The Overton window is shifting rightwards, and now the Labour Party, which is ostensibly meant to be for labourers, for workers, left wing, has massively shifted to the right and massively committed to many policies which wouldn't be out of place a few decades ago, from like the BNP, British National Party and stuff, right? So there is definitely a danger in how it's done. I think it's different for our sort of size audiences because we're not like in charge of massive multimedia platforms.
Right.
But at the same time, I think you need to have a critical mind if you're going to look at these ideas. You need to be ready to look not just at the like immediate sort of quantifiable stuff, but also the sociological, the qualitative. You need to be able to have the intersectional mind, and crucially, you got to engage with people who are part of like. Is one thing to treat like if someone said, I believe that the world's only like 6,000 years old or whatever. Sure, like a person can follow the scientific method and demonstrate through like carbon dating or whatever. That's not correct, right? But if someone makes a claim that's rooted in some sort of social marginalization, I think it's useful to be intersectional and involve people of that targeted group, right? Like Raptor made a really good point about being able to draw on intersectional authors. So W.E.B. Du Bois, Frantz Fanon, Cedric Robinson, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Maya Angelou. There's so I'm just naming big names, right? But there's so many of it are available to read and such. If I'm reading about LGBTQ people, I'd want to look at James Baldwin, black and gay, Bell Hooks, Sean Fay. There's loads of people that you can draw from for any like
Right.
thing. And even just be like to zoom, like, because I think it's obviously also sort of a bit of a, not a privilege, but like for me, because I'm at university, right? Like I'm reading a lot of academic stuff anyway, so it's a bit easier for me to just say, oh yes, read these people. It's also just going to people outside your immediate identity, right? Like I mean, I think the way we view disability is a bit tricky, because like it's not like a binary. Oh yes, I am disabled or I am not. But I've got, I have, I'm an able-bodied person, right? Like I've got motor skills to that of a person that's able to engage in the normative functions of society. I can speak fluidly. Like I don't. I mean, maybe I do, right? But like I don't look that much different to the normative idea of what a person looks like. So therefore, I can access things in the society to a degree of more ease than a lot of people can. So it's important for me to engage with the perspectives of people who, say, are using a wheelchair or have conditions which mean they aren't granted that same
No, I
mobility,
it's definitely
right?
on a spectrum. Like, although I'm blind in my left eye and I'm not able to drive a car as a result of that, that does not make me less privileged than a person who is entirely blind and has other things associated with that condition that limit them even further than myself. No, I understand what you're saying. I would just say that in the same way that you do not need to read Mein Kampf to understand that Nazism is a horrible, terrible ideology that needs to be outright rejected, I think that it is useful in a way to read it in order to understand not why they think the way that they do, but to better combat their way of thinking when they try to articulate it to people who are not as aware of the tenets of National Socialism. Because I'm sure you're well aware, one of the things that they try to do to inculcate people into these ideas is not to just go right up to them and say, hey, Hitler was a good guy, Hitler was amazing. They use these dog whistles, right? They use these small little things to try and slowly inculcate people and indoctrinate them over time to this way of thinking. And part of understanding Nazism is understanding those dog whistles, understanding when somebody is trying to indoctrinate somebody else into that ideology, and putting things in place in order to prevent that indoctrination from taking place in as unopposed of a setting. So I think that it's not necessarily a matter of trying to go, well, we need to understand how they think in order to understand why they hold these beliefs. It's we need to understand how they think so that we can better go against those ideas and prevent them from spreading in a vacuum of ignorance, in my opinion.
I mean, I think that it's definitely like, if you are of a historical perspective and you are, I think Michael Carley actually makes an interesting point here. I can't read that. What if you grabs hold of me? And this might be a little bit of a joke from Michael, but I think it's actually quite important, because every action and word and statement from a fascist is in service of fascism. And I think that a book like Mein Kampf, whilst I mean, it's less likely to be as much of a lie as some of the stuff that Hitler said later, it's still written by a fascist with the intent of enacting fascism. And so,
correct.
I think I would want to. I disagree slightly that you would need to read it to understand fully.
No. It's not that you need to read it in order to know that Nazism is a horrible ideology. If anything, you don't need to read it to understand that. I just think that
action is more.
In order to understand some of the nuances of how they try to inculcate people into these ideologies, it is important that at least a subset of the population inform themselves of this. Otherwise, in my opinion, they will take advantage of that ignorance in order to spread the ideas.
Inform through the sociology classes and history classes, and like analysis by people who have studied
Why not
fascism.
read it in a
right?
vacuum? You shouldn't just read it with no context behind who wrote it and why these ideas are dangerous and why these ideas are harmful to people. That should be understood before one endeavors to read that book. There's definitely a framework that needs to be built before that.
But like, yeah. but like even that there's a lot of framework, and even then I would say that it's something you would read because you are like an expert, or you have made yourself informed enough to the point where you can say, okay, I understand that going into this book is going to try and lie to me about the the narrative of the world it presents, right? Like in the same way that when you watch a film, like you have a rating on that film, and I'm not saying that I fully agree with like the rating system, right? But a kid can watch Toy Story because whilst it is a story with it's a good story with lots of complex parts, it's a story for children. Versus if they watch, say, like I don't know, The Godfather, because they are yet to, they're a child, right? So they haven't yet learned all of the information of the social world to be able to process
Right, they
the
don't have the
events
necessary
depicted.
context for what is taking
Well, it's
place.
not even just context, but being able to process actually things like murder and betrayal and sex and things which have a quotient of needing to have that experience in the real world to be able to process it. And so, for the same reason, you wouldn't like say, "Hey, come on, kids! You're 5 years old. It's time to put on Goodfellas now." We need to, like there needs to be, I think, that same discretion for the materials that fascists produce. Because as Michael makes the point in the chat, for as much as Michael, given some of the other stuff Michael said in this chat, I mean, it's a little bit, I think it may be an unintentional point, but I also think that it's a good one. People are not immune to propaganda. It's that meme, right, with Garfield. Like, you've got to be aware that everything that a fascist does is in service of fascism. And so... I think Mein Kampf, obviously, because it's so famous as a book that Hitler wrote, like you would probably be aware. But even a single line, if every other book of that book you think, oh wow, this is awful, but one line slips past you and you think, oh, you've internalized something that a fascist has slipped beyond your radar of BS, and maybe the next time you say think about the history of religion, you accept some Martin Luther-esque point about Jewish people and Christianity, right? Well, because we joke about it, but at the same time, there's a reason they want their stuff read and they want their voices heard because they're fascists, right?
But to a degree, there is going to be a subset of the population that is going to find themselves exposed to those ideals in some context, regardless, whether that be through somebody trying to inculcate them into those ideas, whether it be because they pick it up at a library somewhere and just happen to notice it and then they start reading it with no context whatsoever. I think in both of those scenarios, it is better that person be equipped and have a broader context of the movement of fascism, of who Adolf Hitler was, what his ideas were, and how they were dangerous. I just think that there is an inevitability to those ideas being spread around to a certain degree, because that's what human beings do with any set of ideas. And in the face of that inevitability, I think that one of the best tools to arm ourselves against inculcation is informing ourselves of that broader context.
Yeah, through education and through a proper, and a society, not just like in school, but also like a societal, like,
right.
We hold dear and integral to us principles of justice and social justice and anti-racism and anti-everything, right? I would also firstly hope that the library's not just slapped Mein Kampf on the shelves.
Unfortunately, if you go to certain libraries in the South, I imagine you'll find it there.
And then secondly as well, like the aim is also to have, if there's fewer people who believe in a right-wing world and a fascist world, there are fewer people that would say, "Hey kids, come and read Mein Kampf,"
right?
And similar like leading texts and such. It's getting very dark here. So,
I'm sorry, I've kept you so long. I really apologize.
No, it's fine. Honestly, like it's been a nice chat, and it'd be nice to it's been interesting. So it'd be nice to talk to yourself and BBM. And I'm sure I keep bringing up that stream you had with Dustin, he who shall not be named. There were some others that would be who were sort of seemingly more of a liberal centrist like perspective. It would be interesting to talk to at some point. I'm always up for conversation and such. Albeit just as long as they're not like swearing, saying the N-word and such. And
wait a minute, are you exposing yourself to other ideas, Owen? That's dangerous. You can't be doing that. I'm joking. I'm giving you a hard time.
But no, thanks for coming on, Ayden, and thank you obviously earlier for BBM. And yeah, we'll have to chat again soon. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care, all.
Take care, everybody.
Oops, wrong button.